Welcome to Web Design 2, the final weeks. We've only got a few weeks left in class, but obviously things have changed quite a bit in the last few weeks. And it's not only us dealing with this change, the whole world is struggling with trying to bring their education online, switching to learning exclusively at home, working from home, and there are a lot of challenges ahead of us. I do think, though, we can make the best of this. In some ways, this may actually be better for a web design class. It is web design after all. We should be able to do this online. But before we dive into the logistics of how the class will change and work, I did want to share some kind of opening thoughts with you about the situation we're in right now and the changes that might bring and is bringing, and then what we can do as designers maybe to help during this worldwide event. Also, be introducing a few tools that my team uses at work and that I found helpful myself for collaboratively working on things together, and some techniques as well for trying to stay productive in this kind of chaotic and crazy environment. So we're going to be talking mainly about working and learning from home. And some of you have been doing this for a while. You've maybe done some freelance work at home, or you've had remote work. You've probably had online classes already. But for many, this is the first time they've experienced working from home or learning at home. So obviously, this was all brought on by coronavirus. And I think the coronavirus, as much change as it already has had on the world, it's going to have even more profound change down the road. And I think there are going to be multiple sectors affected by this worldwide event. And obviously, this is all just speculation at this point. No one can know for certain. But if we look at history, if we look at other major events like 9/11, the stock market crash in 2008, those had profound impacts on different industries. And I think the coronavirus will have even more of a profound impact on how we relate to each other in culture. And as designers, we need to think about both the problems and the opportunities that this situation brings us and decide what is my responsibility in this situation? How can I respond and help in this environment? So, obviously, I think one of the first changes that will happen, and we're dealing with this change right now, is that work and education, at least most of it, will go online. And while that's out of necessity right now, as we're social distancing or we're quarantined, I think much of that will remain even after this virus is gone. I think this will fundamentally change the way people work and fundamentally mentally change the way we teach or learn. So I own an online education company, as some of you know, and we found that half the battle for getting people to effectively teach online is even getting them to try things in the first place. People are generally very resistant to change. And this is forcing everyone to change and to try new tools and to adapt very quickly. And while it's not definitely the ideal way to have that change happen, usually this kind of change would take decades of marketing, of branding, to get someone to even make that first step and try remote work or remote learning for the first time. And so I think just the fact that people have had to adapt and change, that's going to have a lasting effect on how we proceed forward. I think remote work in the future will probably be normal, as will things like grocery delivery. I'm not sure if you've heard the term gig economy, but that's kind of like freelance type delivery services where people are delivering groceries for Uber, or there's all kinds of delivery services nowadays for things. Obviously, we now need those things more than ever, and I think those are going to turn from gigs into full-time jobs probably. It'll change other things as well, like movies and entertainment. Obviously, we cannot go to theaters right now. So some movie studios are starting to release movies online, what would normally be a theatrical release, and I think that's a good thing overall. And I think that'll last past this pandemic as well. There's going to be many other changes, of course, automations and manufacturing, all kinds of things. But I think it's important that when we're in a situation like this, to do what Mr. Rogers says and look for the helpers. Who's actually helping in this environment? We already mentioned a few things. It's the teachers, students, nurses, doctors, obviously, are on the front lines of this, and they're probably in need of the most help. But parents need help. They've got their kids at home. There are so many people that need help right now. And as designers, we have, I think, a responsibility to help the helpers in a sense, and give them tools, give them materials that they can work with to make their lives better. So, how can we help as designers? There's so many different ways. I'm just going to throw out a few ideas. Um, One is just producing material. So you've probably seen this kind of stuff going around on social media and on websites, but a designer made these, an illustrator, a designer, someone had to get together and actually make these materials to help encourage people to stay home, to be able to diagnose symptoms, to give them techniques for how to wash their hands properly, all these things. So that's one way designers can help, obviously, is by designing these kind of materials, the memes, the videos, to promote health and well-being. Um, App designers in particular can design apps for things like symptom checks. So this was an app that was made by designers at Apple, who teamed up with the CDC and the government um, to help diagnose whether or not you should call the doctor, whether or not you should socially distance. And this kind of thing can end up saving medical systems huge amounts of calls and influx of traffic, which obviously is a big problem right now. Another kind of side effect of everyone having to be remote is that we're socially distant from each other. So designers can work with social networks and apps to try to bring us closer together, even though we're all remote. The same things like Zoom and House Party and FaceTime and all these apps that we use to socialize are more important now, I think, than ever. And those are just a few ways. And we're all having to kind of learn this stuff together. So I thought that it would be helpful if I kind of took a quick overview of some tools and techniques that I've learned over time for remote work and learning while at home. So there are obviously some benefits of remote work and learning. One is just more flexible. You're more in control of your time to some degree, at least. You have your own environment. You can control your environment. You're not, having to rush to classes and get there before the bell necessarily. Uh, there are some real benefits, especially with flexibility of being able to work and learn remotely. Focus, and this is kind of dependent on your home situation. Not everyone can focus at home as well, but there is potential for focus where if you can at least carve out a little office space at home, perhaps you may be able to focus better than being constantly interrupted by meetings or, you know, peers running around your dorms, making a lot of racket. Um, if you can carve out that space, then there is higher potential for focus. And we'll talk about some techniques for helping if you can't focus at home too. And then just general more autonomy, as we mentioned, it's flexible, but you're also more in control. So you can choose your schedule a bit more. Um, you're just in more control of your learning and your working environment than you would be if you were at the office or if you were in the classroom. Now, there's other benefits, of course, but there are also some very real challenges, and that's what we're going to focus on. So, as designers, part of our job is to help solve people's problems, and we can start by trying to solve some of our own problems here at home while we learn and work together. But we can also start thinking about the problems that other people are having, trying to notice those things and think, how might I design, say, an app or a website that could help in these times? So obviously, it's challenging to collaborate well remotely. My company has in the past at least had kind of a hybrid environment where like probably around half to 60% of the team or so was in the office, and then about half or so were working remotely at any given time. And a lot of the collaborative work we would do, we would save for that kind of face time in the office because it was much easier to do. Just gather around a whiteboard, have a quick discussion or a chat. It can be so much more efficient than having to try to pass around a lot of Google Docs or send emails or even operate through chat or video streams. It's just not quite as efficient. So obviously collaboration is a big issue. This one is a big one too, especially in times like these where, we're understandably anxious and uncertain about the future, and trying to stay motivated and productive while all this is going on, but also just being on your own is quite difficult. And so that's a real struggle as well for everyone right now, I think. And then social connection. So not just productive relationship connections, but actual social interaction that can help your mental well-being, that can help you stay connected to your work or to your school. That gets lost when we're all working remotely to a large degree. And so what I'm going to do for the next few slides is just talk about ways we could address maybe some of these issues with existing tools, and then also maybe think a little bit about how we might help in design solutions for these problems. So when it comes to collaboration tools, there are many, many tools out there. And just a caveat, the following is just my opinion on things. So I've tried a ton of different tools. My company experiments with things all the time. And these are the tools that I found to be the most helpful. But there are multiple tools in each of these categories that we're going to talk about. So when it comes to things like knowledge management, so this is like what goes in the filing cabinet, what information does the team need to have knowledge or have shared access to? And so in a learning environment, that might be shared class notes or textbooks or anything that you have to organize basically. And I found that Notion is incredibly helpful for that. So just to show you what Notion looks like, I'm going to switch over real quick to the browser. All right, let's bring up Notion. And this is our path rate Notion. You can see on this sidebar here, we've got all these categories, and we have a ton of Notion documents. But we document things like workflows. So here's a list of our workflows. Like if we have an emergency issue, like our software goes down, this is how we resolve it. We have people that are tagged on these workflows. And this really helps us kind of work more effectively together because, especially when you're remote, you don't have like that one-to-one communication all the time. And so you need documentation for how we work together under certain scenarios. So yeah, Notion is very flexible. It's kind of a block-based document editor where you can add things like tables, images, notes, structured and unstructured data, and then you can search for it and collaborate on it with your team. There are lots of great resources for learning Notion, and I definitely recommend you check it out. I use it for both work and personal notes, and so that can be a great tool for shared knowledge management. Video chat, we'll be using Zoom in our class, but Zoom is by far the most stable video chat app I've used. It also has the grid view where you can have many, many different people on one Zoom call and see everyone's face, which when we're working remotely, we need to think about that because a lot of the communication that we do at work when we're together is not just what we're saying. It's not just written text or vocal language, it's body language, it's facial expressions. And a lot of video chat solutions don't have that grid of faces that you can actually see the people who are talking. And that's an incredibly important feature. So that's one of the things I like about Zoom, and also just the general stability. Zoom is much more reliable in my experience and in others that I've seen when it comes to actually keeping a stable and high quality stream. So yeah, I would say Zoom in general is what I would lean towards if you want to do group chat. For documentation, collaborative documents, Google Docs is really good for this. We've tried this in class already, and I think you all already use it. But it can be really great if you're working together on a single document. It's just fantastic for that. For group chat, Slack is what I would recommend for that. There are obviously other solutions to this as well, like Microsoft Teams is kind of their copy of Slack. It's kind of a clunkier version though, a bit more corporate-y. Slack in general has more plugins. I like the design better. It's a more pleasant experience in my opinion. So Slack is great. We use Slack every day at my office. So we use it more for our kind of water cooler style discussions and sometimes for project work. But like every day, for instance, we have our check-ins channel here on the left, and everybody kind of checks in and says what they're doing for that day. That kind of helps us, especially when we're remote, kind of stay somewhat connected around who's working on what today and what might they need help with kind of stuff. And we also will share kind of interesting tidbits of things. And like there's our learning channel where we'll link to interesting things about learning, kind of a random channel for just kind of general discussion of lots of different random stuff. We have lots of channels here, and then you can also, of course, direct message people. So when you need synchronous or kind of somewhat asynchronous communication, Slack is really great for that. I definitely recommend that if you're even for like a class project, setting up Slack can be quite helpful as a way to keep everybody on the same page. Now, one thing that's missing from design collaborative work is kind of that brainstorming phase. So when we do jam sessions in class, for instance, usually groups will group up around whiteboards and you'll start by drawing and sketching. That's very difficult to do remotely. And I wouldn't say I've found like a perfect tool for this at all. So I'm listing 3 different tools here that are kind of collaborative whiteboards, if you want to call them that. One is a pretty new one. It's called Excalidraw. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I've had some good success with that, and they just recently added their collaborative features. Also, Whimsical, that's kind of a wireframing and workflow type tool. I can just show you what these look like. So this is Excalidraw. I can draw shapes on here, write text. I can change the style of these texts. So if I don't want that like Comic Sans looking thing, be normal or code. You can change sizes. It's a pretty flexible tool with some very kind of basic stuff, but it also has this collaborative mode here. If you click this, you can start a session and share a link with anybody, and it will privately sync all of that work that you're doing. So for kind of whiteboard level planning, I recommend that tool. There's also the wireframing tool here. Now, the kind of group sync features in this tool are a little bit lacking. It's not quite as collaborative as Excalidraw or Google Docs or something like that, but it does work basically. And then of course there's also Figma. Figma is more of a high fidelity design tool. You can use it for sketching and wireframes, but it's really more meant for polished design. So I would recommend trying Excalidraw if you want to do kind of a whiteboard level thing. For design in general, we just talked about Figma. Figma really is hands down the best at this. Their collaborative features, it's almost like a multiplayer game where you can see everybody as a different cursor and you can be designing the same designs at the same time, and it's pretty awesome, really. It's a pretty great experience. And so I definitely recommend Figma, not only as a great design tool individually, but especially if you're collaborating on like a class project or something like that. Project management. If you're trying to work with a group, especially for a longer or more difficult project, I would definitely recommend Basecamp. So there are tons of project management tools out there. Basecamp has a pretty particular philosophy about how work should be done, and that comes through in their product. Their product is very simple. This is my view. Here's what's on my plate at work right now. I've got these notifications in my inbox if anyone mentions me. So basically you have like tasks that have a description and then people can comment on them. And we found that for actually getting things done together as a team, Basecamp is a very effective tool for that. And it also works well for communicating with clients. So if you have like a freelance client you're working with, you need to share files with them or you need to have deadlines or communication. Basecamp, one of their core mantras is that project management is communication. And so it's all very people oriented. You'll see all these faces here on these projects, and a lot of it is chat and discussion based type of stuff. So I definitely recommend Basecamp for just general project management. And then obviously those are just tools. So you can have all the tools you want. You can have the best equipment, but if you're not motivated and you're not feeling productive, then those tools don't do much for you. So there's obviously more to getting things done at home than just the tools. So I'll share a few things about motivation and productivity that have been helpful to me and my team. Some of these we've talked about before, but some of these are unique to kind of our work from home situation. So one thing I definitely recommend you do is try to design an environment for yourself to work or learn. Have a special place in your house, in your room, wherever you are, that you always go to work. And so make sure the lighting is right. I typically prefer dimmer lights. Bright lights kind of give me a headache. So make sure you have control over that if you can, and be just kind of sensitive to your back. You'll be sitting a long time. You're already trapped in the house. So make sure you have a good chair, and then make sure your desk has the things on it that you would find inspiring and that you might need. So I would just recommend kind of setting it up like it's an office, really, if you can, but make it uniquely yours. Make it a special place you can go to. And then this is an important one just to kind of train your brain to be in the right mode when you go to work. So try to work in the same place and play or do other things elsewhere. So if you have your desk set up with your laptop on it, and you're working for a few hours, and then you're playing video games in the same spot for a few hours, that's going to over time kind of erode that focus you might have if you were only instead working in one place. So try to have a special spot for just work, for just learning, for just focus. And what you'll find over time is if you do that for long enough, your brain will automatically switch into that mode when you go into that environment. And this is kind of another similar trick, but it's really tempting to think, well, I'm working from home, it doesn't really matter what I wear, but it actually kind of does. What we have on our bodies actually has a pretty profound psychological impact on how we're perceiving our current role. So, a lot of the temptation is, I'm working from home, I don't even need to wear pants. But I don't recommend taking that approach over the long term. It might be nice every once in a while to kind of chill with your wardrobe. But I would recommend thinking about it more like what you'd call a loadout. So if you play video games or Fortnite, for instance, you have these different uniforms and costumes you wear, different sets of equipment that they call loadouts. And I think this is actually a helpful way of thinking at home too. So when I'm at home, I've been experimenting with the idea of creating my own little loadouts where I have, kind of my work loadout. So this is my wardrobe for that. These are the shoes I wear. My exercise loadout. Here's my exercise clothes, my exercise shoes, and my AirPods. And then my kind of chill mark loadout, which is my pajamas and my pajama shoes and all this stuff. And it actually helps me switch into those modes. So it's really important to take these kind of things intentionally because everything, if you don't do this, everything is going to just blend together in your day. Um, Weekends won't be any different from weekdays, work won't be any different from play, and that is not a healthy thing over time. So try to use these kind of tricks to kind of force your mind into the right mode. This is a very practical technique that we've talked about before, but I just wanted to review it again because it is so helpful, especially in times like these. So the Pomodoro technique, it's very simple. Basically, you set a timer for 25 minutes and you only focus on one thing. So say you're going to work on your web design assignments for 25 minutes. That's not a huge commitment. It helps you make that initial step because you're not saying, oh, I've got 3 hours of work to do, I don't want to do that. It's really easy to procrastinate in that scenario. But if you're just saying, all I have to do is work for 25 minutes, most people don't have trouble accepting that. And so you set that timer and you only focus on that thing. It's very important that you're disciplined about only focusing on one thing for 25 minutes. In fact, the rules say, the Pomodoro rules, if you get interrupted for longer than I think 30 seconds or something like that, then you have to start the Pomodoro over. So they're pretty strict about that idea of focus. And then you take 5-minute breaks in between. So when the timer goes off, take a break. This is a good time to stand up, to walk around a bit, kind of do miscellaneous type stuff in that 5 minutes, and then start another one. And then after 3 Pomodoros, you'll want to take a longer break. So either a 10-minute, 15-minute, or 20-minute break. And I found that most days, even if I can only get in 7 different Pomodoros, which is not that many hours, I am quite productive on those days. So I would encourage you to definitely try this. There are lots of apps and tools that can help you with this. If you just Google for Pomodoro app, you'll find a lot. I'll show you the one I use. It's called Focus. So right now, if I was going to use this, I'm teaching, I would just start this timer. It actually has an audible tick. I'm not sure if you can hear that or not, but that actually helps psychologically get me into this mode too. When I'm hearing that tick from the timer, I know that I'm working on a Pomodoro and then I'm focusing on that thing. And when I'm done, it'll tell me I need to do a 5-minute break here. It'll time that as well. I get notifications from this app on my watch and on my phone. So you don't have to get that fancy with it. This tool is quite helpful for me. I don't know exactly how many hours I've logged on it, but there's been a lot, and it gives you a lot of data too. But you can use an actual real physical timer, and there's also a lot more like kind of just simple apps for doing this. This one, though, if you're interested, is called Focus, and they have a native iOS app and a native desktop app, and I found it quite helpful. So there's also the mental side of this. We're obviously in a very stressful time, and it's also just kind of, well, I mean, literally lonely most of the time to be working from home constantly. And so I would encourage you as much as possible to try to get outside in nature safely, take socially distant walks as much as you can. This will help you kind of restore some like naturalness to your environment. It'll help you get some fresh air, hopefully, and get a little bit of exercise. It also can be helpful to journal, especially if you're stressed. Writing can be a very clarifying thing. And so if you're finding yourself stuck on something, um, and you don't know how to proceed next, I find it's helpful to kind of take a step back and just try to write out what you're feeling, almost in like a journal type style. And that can add some real clarity in my experience. And then just simple things like playing games. These could be video games, these could be board games. Try to do something collaborative with other people that's just purely fun. It's not just productivity or work. And don't feel guilty about playing games or watching Netflix or binge watching Tiger King. Well, maybe feel guilty about that. But all that to say, just try to balance out the mental health side of this as well. And don't feel like you just have to be productive all day. And then if you need help, especially, uh, reach out. So if you're struggling with class or anything with technology that I could help with, just reach out at any time on Slack, or anywhere really. But especially if you're experiencing a lot of anxiety, reach out to someone who cares about you and have a conversation with them. And that can go a long way as well. Now, social connection is probably the most problematic part of this whole scenario we're in right now, where everybody is, for the most part, socially distancing and quarantining. And it's very hard to go from an environment where you're around your friends all the time at school, or you're around your colleagues at work, and then all of a sudden you're at home by yourself, or you're at home with just your family. So there are ways of maintaining social connections, obviously, and people are kind of learning those very quickly. But I think it's somewhat of a mindset shift that we need to do. We're socially separated, not distant. So people shouldn't feel distant from each other, ideally, in this environment. We need to stay far enough apart physically, but we can still feel close to other people by using tools, by communicating frequently. You can have casual Zoom chat. So most people use Zoom for more like business or online learning, but I've used Zoom for just casual conversations with friends, and it works great for that too. Slack can be kind of a fun way to, like, if you have a friend group that you want to just kind of casually hang out with or share, funny memes with or something like that. Slack can be great for that. You can use kind of all these business collaborative tools just purely socially, and that's fine. Coffee hangouts can be kind of fun. So if you usually grab coffee with friends periodically, don't stop doing that. Just go ahead and schedule it. Do it over Zoom, do it over FaceTime. Try to keep that going. Multiplayer games can be a good way to do this, especially if they have like a chat feature. Like a lot of people do this online now with Fortnite. It's actually a pretty big phenomenon where you just have a group of friends kind of hanging out on this multiplayer map, and they're kind of playing to win, but it's not really so much about winning as it is just having a fun time and hanging out. So that's obviously been going on well before this pandemic, but it's even more necessary while we're in the midst of all this. Remote book clubs or podcasting clubs can be quite fun. I'm in a podcast one right now. I've done book clubs before as well, and they actually work quite well over Zoom. It's not a bad experience. It's not quite as good as the real thing, obviously, but I definitely encourage you to do something kind of intellectual together that's not school. So a book club is a great way to do that. Find an interesting book, team up with some friends, and just have kind of remote discussions over Zoom. And there are tons of other ideas. If you guys think of things, just let me know. Post it in Slack or share it with the class in some way, things that have helped you feel more socially connected to each other. And finally, I wanted to end on just that while we're talking about productivity and learning at home, it's really much more important that we all stay healthy, that we all have a life still. So this quote, I think, sums this idea up nicely. There is no wealth but life, John Ruskin. And so obviously productivity and money and things like that matter. And we stress about those things, especially when the economy looks like it might collapse or something. It's much more important that we maintain our own safety, our own health, and the health and safety of those around us as well. So when we're thinking about working on our final projects or trying to finish the semester well, just keep in mind that it's most important that you stay safe, and that you stay physically and mentally healthy during all of this. So if you have any thoughts, feel free to share them with me or the class, and we'll keep going through this. We're all in this together. In fact, the entire world, for the most part, is dealing with what we're dealing with right now. and we will get through it.